Desmond Corven stood at the foot of his wife's grave, eyes dry, heart unreadable. But just 2 days later, he was seen in a luxury hotel room with Ellira Voss, Malia's younger sister, the same woman who had wept beside him at the funeral. Malia. Corven lived a life many admired. She was poised, kind, and known for her generosity in the quiet, well-kept community of Alder Hills. Every morning, she walked her dog through the neighborhood, exchanging warm smiles with neighbors and dropping off-baked goods for the elderly couple next door. Her presence carried a calm, comforting energy that made people feel instantly at ease. Malia had worked as a freelance interior designer and mostly stayed home, investing her time in volunteering, gardening, and supporting her husband's career from behind the scenes. Her husband, Desmond Corven, was a private investment broker who handled high-profile clients. To the outside world, Desmond was everything a woman could want: handsome, successful, articulate. He spoke affectionately about Malia at dinner parties and always seemed eager to show the world how much he appreciated her. The Corvens had no children, but no one seemed to mind or ask too many questions. People assumed they had made peace with that choice. For 8 years, Desmond and Malia maintained the image of a flawless couple. They were often seen at charity galas, local art shows, and weekend getaways to their lake house. But there was something beneath their carefully constructed image that only a few people noticed: an invisible wall that had started forming in the last year of their marriage. Malia's smile had grown a little thinner, and Desmond's business trips had become more frequent. Still, no one suspected anything serious. After all, relationships had their ups and downs. When Malia's younger sister, Ellira Dane, moved in, everything shifted. Ellira was a bright, ambitious, recent college graduate with a degree in communications. She moved in with the Corvens temporarily to save money while job hunting. At first, it seemed like the perfect arrangement. Malia adored her sister and loved the idea of helping her get started in life. But soon, Ellira's presence became more than just temporary support. She was energetic and impulsive, and her youth brought a new atmosphere to the house. She'd play loud music, make spontaneous cocktail nights, and encourage Desmond to unwind after long days of meetings. Ellira looked nothing like Malia. Where Malia was elegant and modest, Ellira was bold and eye-catching. She had platinum blonde hair, piercing green eyes, and a wardrobe that turned heads. While she never acted overtly inappropriate, there were subtle moments that some family friends couldn't ignore. Desmond laughed more around her. His glances lingered. Their conversations became private, and their inside jokes started excluding Malia. Still, Malia didn't confront them. Maybe she didn't want to believe there was anything to worry about. Maybe she hoped it was just temporary. The shift in dynamic became clear during a family barbecue. One of Malia's cousins noticed how Desmond reached for Ellira's hand while making a joke, a gesture that was oddly intimate. Another guest mentioned how Ellira seemed overly familiar with Desmond's habits, like knowing exactly how he liked his steak or his drink. While no one dared to say anything, the gossip began quietly behind Malia's back. Yet Malia continued smiling through it all. She didn't stop her sister from staying, nor did she distance herself from Desmond. If she was hurting, she didn't show it. Desmond, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. His business was booming, and his confidence was growing. He started coming home later and brushing off plans with Malia to catch up on work. On weekends, he and Ellira would disappear for errands that lasted longer than expected. To outsiders, it looked like Desmond had simply found comfort in having a younger presence around. But to the few who were watching closely, something unspoken was brewing. In those final few months before tragedy struck, Malia was often seen sitting alone in the garden, writing in a leather notebook, or staring quietly at the flowers. She had started skipping social events and avoiding phone calls from close friends. Her eyes no longer had their familiar sparkle, and she walked with a weight that no one could define. But there were no signs of violence, no outward cries for help, Just silence, the kind of silence that suggested something wasn't right, but that no one could quite put into words. Not yet. It was a cold, grey morning when everything changed. Rain had started falling before dawn, soaking the quiet streets of Alder Hills. The Corven residence stood still, blinds drawn, no sign of movement from inside. At 6:42 a.m., a 911 call was placed from Desmond Corven's phone. His voice, though steady, had a strange calmness as he reported that his wife had been found unconscious in the bathtub. When paramedics arrived, Desmond led them wordlessly through the front door, down the hallway, and into the master bathroom. Malia's lifeless body was submerged in cloudy water, her head resting awkwardly against the tub's edge. A towel, still folded, lay untouched on the sink counter. The scene was unsettling. Malia had no visible wounds, no signs of a struggle. Her skin was pale, lips slightly blue. It looked, at first glance, like a tragic accident, one of those rare, sudden slips that happen when the world is looking the other way. Desmond claimed he had returned home after an early client meeting and found the bathroom door ajar. According to him, Malia had likely taken a bath and accidentally drowned. At the hospital, a preliminary report suggested drowning as the cause of death, but doctors found traces of a sedative in her system, one not listed among her prescriptions. The dosage wasn't enough to be fatal on its own, but it could have easily caused drowsiness or unconsciousness in water. Toxicology results confirmed the sedative as Zofinex, a rarely prescribed medication known for its strong, fast-acting effects. It wasn't something found in Malia's medicine cabinet. Despite the odd circumstances, the case wasn't initially treated as suspicious. The Corvens were well known in the community. Desmond, still dressed in his damp suit, wept quietly in the hospital hallway as Ellira arrived with tears in her eyes and arms around him. Within hours, arrangements for a private autopsy were quietly pushed aside. The police listed the cause of death as accidental drowning. Malia's body was released to Desmond within 2 days. Her funeral was arranged swiftly, almost too swiftly for some. It was a small, elegant service held at a chapel overlooking Alder Hills Cemetery. Friends and extended family gathered, many still in disbelief. Desmond wore a crisp black suit and stood at the front, his eyes shielded by dark sunglasses. Ellira stood close beside him, her head bowed, her hand often gripping his arm. Some thought it was just a sister's grief, clinging to the last connection she had to her older sibling. Others weren't so sure. The ceremony itself was brief. Desmond delivered a short tribute, his voice soft and rehearsed. He praised Malia's kindness, her elegance, her devotion. He didn't cry, not once. Ellira read a poem she said Malia had always loved, though no one recalled Malia ever mentioning it before. Then the casket was lowered into the ground and, within minutes, the crowd began to disperse. After the burial, Desmond didn't return home with the rest of the family. He claimed he needed time to clear his head. That evening, neighbors noticed the house remained dark. The porch light flickered on around midnight, but no one was seen entering or leaving. The next day, a few people stopped by to offer condolences. No one answered the door. It was on the second evening, barely 48 hours after Malia had been laid to rest, that the photo surfaced. A man and woman seen walking into a downtown luxury hotel. The man wore a familiar suit, his hand resting gently on the lower back of a young blonde woman in a crimson dress. A hotel guest snapped the photo from across the lobby, thinking it looked like a celebrity sighting. It wasn't until the image was shared online that people began recognizing the faces. It was Desmond, and the woman with him, undeniably Ellira. The image went viral within hours. Neighbors were stunned. Former friends of the Corvens whispered, in disbelief. Grief turned to suspicion. Questions poured in. Why would a grieving husband be at a hotel with his late wife's sister just 2 days after the funeral? Why did Ellira look so comfortable, so familiar? And more importantly, what really happened to Malia Corven on that rainy morning? No one had answers, but one thing was clear. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The photograph shattered the illusion Desmond Corven had so carefully crafted. As the image of him and Ellira entering the hotel spread online, speculation turned into outrage. At first, Desmond tried to stay silent, hoping the storm would pass. But the whispers grew louder, and the phone calls he once welcomed from business partners and family friends were replaced with silence. Meetings were cancelled, clients pulled out. A man once praised for his professionalism was now being spoken about in hushed voices behind closed doors. Ellira, too, found herself at the center of a growing scandal. She deactivated her social media accounts after receiving a wave of messages, some accusing, others demanding explanations. Former classmates and distant relatives began questioning her character. Even those who once defended her were now unsure. There was no statement, no denial, and most disturbingly, no show of grief for Malia. It was as if Malia had been erased, just as quickly as she had been buried. The hotel staff, pressured by public interest, later confirmed the couple had booked a suite under false names the evening of the burial. Surveillance footage showed them arriving separately, but entering the same room minutes apart. They stayed the night and left together in the morning, their demeanor calm, even cheerful. That single detail shifted public opinion drastically. What many had tried to rationalize as misplaced grief now looked like betrayal, cold and calculated. The case, originally closed as an accidental death, was unofficially reopened. A local journalist named Ellira Voss, known for her work on criminal injustices, took particular interest in the inconsistencies. She began speaking with those close to Malia, former clients, neighbors, distant cousins, gathering information that had been overlooked. According to one of Malia's friends, she had confided just weeks before her death that she was feeling watched in her own home. Another friend claimed Malia had expressed concern about Ellira's growing closeness to Desmond, but didn't want to cause family tension. Ellira dug deeper and discovered that Desmond had recently taken out a life insurance policy on Malia, an unusually large one, just 3 months before her death. The policy, valued at over $1.5 million, listed him as the sole beneficiary. The paperwork had been signed by Malia, but there were doubts whether she had fully understood the terms. She had no history of seeking large insurance coverage and had never mentioned such a decision to anyone. Even more unsettling, the sedative found in her system, Zofinex, had been prescribed under a different name 3 months earlier from a clinic 2 towns over. The signature matched that of a woman named Ellira Corven, a name that didn't exist in any official database but bore a striking resemblance to Malia's. Ellira sent her findings to a retired forensic analyst named Carson Elwick, who had previously worked with the state police. He agreed to review the evidence quietly. Carson examined the autopsy report and found inconsistencies in the timeline. If Malia had taken the sedative shortly before bathing, it would have left her drowsy in under 15 minutes. But the presence of diluted stomach contents suggested she had been unconscious before the bath even began. In his words, "This wasn't an accident. She never slipped. She was placed." Desmond remained quiet during the renewed scrutiny. He hired a legal team and avoided public appearances. But Ellira became increasingly reckless. She was seen shopping in luxury boutiques, dining at upscale restaurants, often on Desmond's arm. Their public outings became more frequent, as if they had either nothing to hide or had fully accepted the rumors swirling around them. Those closest to Malia, her former mentor, her childhood friends, began organizing a private memorial to honor her memory, frustrated by how quickly her death had been forgotten in the shadow of scandal. For them, this wasn't about gossip, it was about justice. What had started as a tragic accident now appeared to be something far darker. The question was no longer whether Desmond and Ellira had betrayed Malia in life. The question was whether they had conspired in her death. And if so, what else had they buried with her? The private memorial for Ellira Corven took place on a quiet Sunday morning, away from reporters and flashing cameras. It was held in the garden of her childhood home, beneath a large oak tree she once loved to sit under. Her former colleagues, old school friends, and a few distant family members gathered to share memories of a woman whose voice had been silenced far too soon. There were no dramatic speeches, just quiet remembrance and the collective weight of unresolved grief. Yet, even in the stillness, something was stirring beneath the surface, a growing determination to uncover the truth. While Desmond and Ellira paraded their new life in public, behind the scenes, Kira Maves and Carson Elwick were putting together a timeline of events that painted a chilling picture. They discovered that Desmond had been in contact with a real estate agent just a week before Malia's death. He had expressed interest in relocating to another state and had specifically asked about selling the Corven house discreetly and quickly. Emails recovered from the agent's office confirmed his intent. What made it more suspicious was the urgency in Desmond's tone. He wanted the house off his hands, fast. At the same time, credit card records showed a string of purchases made by Ellira: luxury clothing, imported fragrances, and high-end travel bags. Most of them had been bought days before the funeral. The name on the account wasn't hers. It was a secondary card issued under Desmond's account, linked to a secret joint banking profile they had opened under aliases. The two had been building a new life before Malia's body was even cold in the ground. Carson analyzed the security system installed in the Corven house. According to Desmond, he had been out during the time of Malia's accident. But the system's logs showed that someone had disabled the front door camera feed an hour before the estimated time of death. No one had mentioned this to authorities, and it hadn't been investigated because Desmond had offered early cooperation, and his status in the community had protected him. The discovery changed everything. Carson now believed Desmond had not left the house at all that morning, or at least not before Malia had died. Meanwhile, Kyra tracked down a nurse named Rianne Tull, who had worked briefly at the clinic where the prescription for Zofinex had originated. Rianne recalled a woman coming in using a temporary ID and requesting a specific sedative for stress-related insomnia. The ID looked questionable, but the woman was persuasive, claiming to be fleeing an abusive relationship. Rianne didn't push back at the time, but when she was shown a photo of Ellira, she paused. She couldn't be sure, but said the woman resembled her. Everything was lining up. Motive, opportunity, evidence. Yet, none of it was enough on its own to prove murder. And the local authorities remained hesitant to reopen the case officially. The town had moved on, content with the narrative of a tragic accident. No one wanted to accuse one of their own, without airtight proof. But something unexpected broke the case wide open. Malia had kept a digital journal stored in a password-protected file on her laptop. Her best friend, Lana Halberd, had always known about it, but never had the heart to open it after her death. After attending the memorial and hearing the mounting suspicions, Lana retrieved the laptop, guessed the password, a phrase Malia always used from her favorite childhood book, and opened the file. Inside were entries dated months before her death. Malia described her growing unease with Desmond, his late nights, the smell of unfamiliar perfume, the whispered phone calls. She mentioned how Ellira had been coming around too often, staying late, dressing inappropriately. One entry, written just a week before her death, read, "If something happens to me, I want people to ask why. I'm starting to feel like I'm being replaced before I've even left." The entry was dated 5 days before her drowning. The journal was the missing piece. It didn't just suggest motive, it suggested foreknowledge, fear. And now, the investigators had the victim's own words pointing directly at the people who would benefit most from her disappearance. The question was no longer whether Desmond and Ellira were hiding something. It was how much longer they could keep the truth buried. The release of Malia's journal changed everything. Once dismissed as a tragic accident, her death now took on a sinister shape that could no longer be ignored. Lana Halberd turned the digital file over to Kira Maves, who immediately forwarded it to Carson Elwick, and more importantly, to a district attorney named Victor Lemaine. Lemaine had a reputation for reopening difficult cases, and the journal's content, raw, emotional, and full of fear, struck a chord. He authorized a formal inquiry within 48 hours, bringing a renewed wave of attention that Desmond Corven and Ellira hadn't anticipated. Desmond's carefully managed world began crumbling. Subpoenas were issued. His office was searched. His bank accounts were frozen. Investigators uncovered additional emails between him and Ellira, discussing moving funds, liquidating stocks, and setting up property purchases in another state under different names. The timing of these conversations coincided almost perfectly with the days leading up to Malia's death. One chilling email from Ellira simply read, "Once she's gone, we can finally breathe." Though vague, in context, it became damning. Neighbors came forward, now willing to speak. One recalled seeing Desmond's car still in the driveway on the morning of Malia's death, contradicting his original statement that he had left early for a meeting. Another remembered hearing what sounded like raised voices coming from the Corven house the night before she died. That detail, once dismissed as ordinary, took on a darker meaning now. The pieces were falling into place. One by one, they pointed to a grim conclusion. Malia hadn't drowned accidentally. She had been eliminated. Ellira, once smug and silent, began to panic. When brought in for questioning, she contradicted herself several times, first claiming she hadn't seen Desmond in weeks before Malia's funeral, then admitting she'd spent the night before the burial at his residence. Her timeline was vague, and when confronted with the receipts from the hotel and her luxury purchases, she had no convincing explanation. Investigators noted her nervous behavior and refusal to answer direct questions. Her attorney requested a recess, but the damage had been done. Desmond, always the composed businessman, tried to maintain his facade. He denied everything. He claimed the journal was fabricated, that Malia had struggled with paranoia and anxiety. He called the entries dramatized fiction, saying she often wrote things that weren't real. But when forensic analysts confirmed the authenticity of the file, its timestamps, metadata, and storage patterns, his claim fell apart. Then came the final blow. Carson Elwick received lab results on the remaining trace chemicals found in Malia's bloodstream. In addition to Zofinex, a faint residue of another compound was detected, one typically used in veterinary sedatives, not available for human prescription. It had been blended into a protein shake found in the kitchen, one that Malia had reportedly consumed daily. Surveillance footage from a local animal clinic showed Ellira picking up the substance under a fake name just 6 days before Malia's death. With this new evidence, prosecutors were ready. Victor Lemaine filed charges against both Desmond Corven and Ellira Voss, conspiracy to commit murder, premeditated homicide, and insurance fraud. Desmond was arrested at his office, where he had continued working as though nothing had changed. Ellira was found attempting to board a late-night bus, out of town, carrying several bags of cash and a forged passport. Their arrest made headlines across the country, turning a once-quiet tragedy into a national scandal. At the trial, Lana Halberd read one of Malia's final journal entries aloud to a packed courtroom. It was a haunting moment. Malia's voice, resurrected through her own words, filled the silence and left an indelible mark on everyone present. There were tears, gasps, and finally, clarity. The jury found both Desmond and Ellira guilty on all counts. They were sentenced to life in prison without parole. The judge called their crime a cold, calculated betrayal of trust and love. After the sentencing, Lana and Malia's remaining friends held one last vigil under the oak tree in her mother's garden. This time, it wasn't just for remembrance. It was for closure. The woman who feared she'd be forgotten had, in the end, uncovered her own truth. Justice, though delayed, had finally come.